Passage in chapter 15. So if you're in chapter 12, we're going to begin there, verses 1 through 8. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went, and as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land, and the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country to the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Now turn to the right a page or two to chapter 15, and we're going to look at the first 6 verses. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield, and your reward shall be very great." But Abram said, "O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus." And Abram said, "Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir." And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, "This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir." And he brought him outside and said, "Look towards heaven and number the stars. If you are able to number them, then," he said to him, "so shall your offspring be." And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Father, as we continue to study the theme of this book of beginnings, I pray, Lord, we would find in it not only a knowledge and understanding of your message, but, Lord, an encouragement also for us to embrace what you have for us and to walk in it, to learn and to grow in it. We thank you for your word, and we trust with hope and faith that it's inspired and it's profitable for us. May we learn from it, grow in it, submit to its authority. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. You may be seated. You know, when we grow up in Sunday school, we look up to guys like Abraham and Jacob. You remember them on the felt board, our heroes, stuck up there? And we thought, man, these were the guys that God really liked. Because God really used these guys in some pretty amazing ways. So they must have really been amazing people. And that's why God chose to be friends with them. That's why God chose to use them. That's why, they were allowed to have little felt figurines of themselves made. Having heroes is a natural thing for us. But if we have heroes with false expectation, that whole concept, that whole idea, that whole practice can become quite a burden. We expect people to be good. Don't we just naturally look at other people and we expect them to be good? And we think, well, I'm good. And so we project our thoughts for ourselves upon them. And we say, well, if I'm good, then they should be good. We naturally think that way. And we want to believe in heroes. And when we find a hero, we want to believe that they have never done anything bad ever. Just like this person is so great and they've done so many great things and they've never done a bad thing whatsoever. And so we want to emulate the heroes of the past, and we want to believe that those heroes are good. And with that belief, we want to place expectations upon the heroes of our present day and those of the future, and even people around us. We're like, if this guy in the past could have been so great, then we too can be great, and those around us can be great. The very fact that we continue to experience disappointment in people. You ever been disappointed in someone? More than once this week maybe? It happens all the time. People disappoint us. And the very fact that happens is proof that we're probably thinking too highly of them in the first place. We're placing expectations upon them that are unreal. And so then we have to carry the burden of feeling and suffering disappointment. And quite generally, the root of this is in the false idea that we are exceptional. I mean, of course, everyone else has problems, but we ourselves, we are good. We are exceptional. And so when we think that we're good, then, well, of course, other people should be good. Deep down, we want to think that humanity is a good place for us to put our hope. What do you want to hope in? Well, I want to hope in people, because people are good, and I have heroes, and I've hoped in my heroes, and I want to hope in other people too. And deep down, that's what we want. We have this desire to see people do great things and change the world. And when in the past this has happened, we turn to those people as icons and we say, look what they've done. Look, they put their heads on our money. They must have been really important. They must have done great things. But when we're shocked when we hear about the dark side. When someone says, I know that everyone loved this guy, but here's some things he did that maybe you didn't know about. And so we hear about the dark side of maybe Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther, or, we just celebrate or remember the day that he posted his thesis on the door at Wittenberg in 1517, and that happened on October 31st. And so we remember that day, and he did great things for the faith. But later on, as he became older, he said and wrote some crazy things. And a lot of people are like, well, I love Martin Luther. Well, me too. But he said and did some crazy things later in life. But we don't like to hear that stuff. Don't say anything bad about Abraham Lincoln. Don't say anything bad about Martin Luther. Don't say anything bad about Billy Graham. And man, right here in the heart of Republican country, don't you dare diss Ronald Reagan. When it comes to our heroes, we take great offense at even the suggestion that they might not be perfect. That's offensive to us. We want to defend our heroes. We don't want to find out that our sports heroes are dog fighters and wife beaters. We don't want to find out that pastor who pastors the giant church and was on the radio and we love him is like a serial adulterer. We don't want to find that stuff out. We don't want to find out that our favorite politicians are actually racists or drug addicts. We want to hope that people are good. That's what we want. But Isaiah 64 verse 6 tells us that our righteousness, what we have in ourselves, our righteousness is as a filthy rag. When Paul encourages people to follow his example, he's not saying, follow me as I do the dumb stuff that I don't want to do, but I do anyway. He says, no, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1, he said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. It was very specific. Why? Because Paul knew, as he told the Romans, in chapter 3, verse 10, there is none righteous, no, not one. And so if you're going to imitate someone, imitate them as they imitate Christ. Imitate them as they make decisions and they step forward in faith and they experience and walk in and display the grace of God. Imitate that, but don't imitate people as they act like people. It's not bad to have heroes if we're willing to recognize that in that person there is weakness, there is brokenness, there is humanity. The best heroes are the ones that show us the grace of God. I have heroes. My step-grandpa, Earl, is a hero to me. Earl Burgerfer. Funny last name, right? He's a great guy. Well, he's with Jesus now, but he was a great guy. And my mom married his son, and his son was not a great guy. He was a rough person. And he came to our rescue. And he gave us a place to live, and he took care of us, and he took us to church. And I know that he wasn't perfect. I remember one time he was changing the battery in my mom's car, and he said a cuss word. He said the B word. I was shocked. He wasn't even talking about a dog. I was shocked that he would do that. He was a good Baptist man. But I learned that he wasn't perfect. I heard him say judgmental things. I know he struggled. I know he had a hard time with the choices that some of his children had made. But he brought me to the place where I first heard about Jesus. He was a great man. And I looked at people who experienced grace in the midst of their brokenness. Like they're just really messed up people, but they know Jesus, and they embrace the grace of Jesus, and they embrace his favor upon their lives. Recently we watched the Rich Mullins movie with the youth group, and before that I watched it at a church in Richmond on my birthday last year. And a lot of people just know Rich Mullins for his songs. He wrote the most popular one, Awesome God, which I think is the worst one, and he believed it was the worst one too. And everyone just thinks, man, this guy really had a strong faith in the Lord. Well, he didn't. He had a strong faith in the grace of God, but beyond that, he struggled. He never got over his first love, and that just wrecked him. And he had a hard time doing right, and he had a hard time not being cynical, but he continued to embrace Jesus. And one of his heroes was a man named Brennan Manning, who also was just a really messed up, broken guy who knew the grace of God and who embraced it and walked in it. Those are the kind of heroes that I like. The dean of my Bible school, Howard Vanderpool, is one of my heroes, and I don't know of anything negative that he has ever said or done. Back in 1989, 88, when I went to Bible school, I think he was like 800 years old. And he's still out there somewhere. He's still kicking. But he's human, and I'm sure that there are problems. And it's okay to think highly of others. But we have to be careful with our hope, where we place it. Hope is that positive expectation. I expect positively for this thing to happen. And when we place our hope in people, it doesn't always happen. People disappoint us. But if we place our hope in people, it's going to hurt us when we find out that they aren't as great as we think they are. The best heroes are the ones that show us Jesus. The best heroes are the ones that show us grace. As we enter into these chapters, and yes, it is not a myth, it's true, and even though this has been a long introduction, we are actually going to cover 38 chapters of the Bible today. Not in our normal way, but just more of a narrative way, but as we enter into chapters 12 through 50 of Genesis, we're introduced to four heroes: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. These are the main characters. These are our heroes of the Old Testament. And as we grew up in Sunday school classes, these were the guys who were given to us as examples. And as we looked at them on the felt board, we said, they can do no wrong. Maybe someday I can be like them. They must have been really good guys with outstanding character. But if we read those chapters again, and we look at their lives, and we look at them with fresh eyes, as that song we sang today, as we ponder anew. And sometimes we have to open the scriptures and ponder anew what the Almighty has done. And what he has done is sometimes not just shown favor upon people because they are good. Sometimes he has shown favor upon people simply because he chose them and he loves them. And that's the case here. He chose Abram, and he loved him, and he showed him his favor. So as we read these chapters, and we set aside our preconceived notions and these pre-programmed ideas that these guys were all perfect, we'll find that they were not perfect. These heroes failed. They had many great moments, but also they did some pretty stupid and pretty selfish things. If Abraham were living today, and this man who has shown great faith and done great things of faith, just one or two of his little incidences, if the press got a hold of it and focused in on it, this guy Abraham, I can't believe it, he lied about his wife, and he said that she was his sister and allowed her to be taken to the bed of Pharaoh. Can you believe he did that? And even as he did that, Pharaoh rewarded Abraham with all of these goods and riches. So Abraham lied, and he sent his wife off to be part of some guy's harem, and at the same time, he became rich in all that. Just imagine what the press would do with that guy. They would destroy him. And that's just one incident. That's one thing that he did. So they had great moments. But beginning in Genesis 12, God makes a promise. He builds upon that promise in chapters 15 and 17. He repeats it. Over and over again, not just to Abraham, but to those who follow, to Isaac and to Jacob. The promise continues to be repeated. God is the promise maker, and it's carried on through his offspring. And here's the reoccurring theme. Now, if you want to wrap it up, here is the theme of Genesis chapter 12 through Genesis chapter 50. People will break their promises, but God will not. God does not break his promises. In fact, if we want to sum up the theme of these chapters, you can look to the end of the book, turn back there to chapter 50. You can sum up the theme of chapters 12 through 50. After Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, after Joseph went through that horrible experience of being a slave and then being a prisoner in the dungeon, and he becomes number 2 in Egypt, and he goes through this whole process with his brothers, and there at the end, he reveals himself to them, and they're shaking in their boots when they realize who this guy is, and he says the most incredible thing. In chapter 50, verse 20, he said, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." This is the theme that I see as being most prominent in verses 12 through 50. God chooses to work out his plan of redemption, his plan of rescue for humanity. He's laying the groundwork right here with this family. And he uses these heroes in Genesis, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. It goes on through Judah, but we get this story of Joseph also. But these guys end up, in spite of their exceptional success, they end up being fallen human beings just like everybody else. Humans will not keep their promises every time. Any humans in the room today? We're going to break some promises. We're going to have a hard time always coming through with the things that we say. But God will always keep his promises. People will fail us. God will not fail us. People will do the wrong things. God will continue to do the right thing. And when we realize this, we can start placing our hope in God instead of placing our hope in other people. That's where it should be. Our hope should be in God, not in people, because people are going to fail us, and we're going to have to suffer disappointment over and over again, because that's what people do. They're weak, they're broken. Even Abraham was weak and broken. Even Isaac was weak and broken. Even Jacob was weak and broken. These heroes, they were weak and they were broken, and we are no different than that. When we realize this, we can start making our stories more about the God who never fails and less about the people who do some good things, but they do fail. You know, as we look at Genesis, we need to shift the way we think about it. Creation, we just want to talk about all the details of creation, but really that's a story telling us about who God is and what God is like. You know, we look through the story, verses or chapter 12 through 50, and we say these are the stories of these men, of this family that God raises up. No, this is the story about God who, in spite of these people, is the God who keeps his promises. He makes his promise and he keeps it. And when we realize this, we can come out from under the pressure we put upon ourselves. We can release others from the pressure that we put upon them, and we can experience the grace that God so richly offers to us, and we can extend that grace to other people. You know, Romans 5 says our hope is in the glory of God, and as long as we are hoping in him to be glorified, then that is the kind of hope that will not be disappointed, because God is going to be glorified. No matter what happens around us, he will be glorified. The first guy we want to look at in detail is Abraham. The story of Noah comes to the end, and then we get the lineage of Shem, and you get this there at the end of chapter 11. Shem had a son, and he had a son, and he had a son, and he had a son, and we just get this list, and eventually, after many generations are listed, we're introduced to a guy named Abram. God spoke to Abram and gave Abram first a condition. There was a condition. Before the promise was laid upon him, there was a condition. The condition was, go from your country and your family to the land that I will show you. And the promise was this: I will make you a great nation, I will bless you and make your name great, and I will make you a blessing to others. And so Abram met that condition. He's like, okay, I will go. I will pack up my family and my belongings, and I will go as Yahweh has called me to go. And with that, God gave his promise, and that promise was never revoked. This is a significant moment. In chapters 4 through 11, humanity was hopeless, and they repeatedly spiraled down into all kinds of evil. But from this moment, something changes. Humans will, in different times and places, still spiral down into the depths of depravity. But now there is hope, and it's there in humanity. And it preserves humanity to some degree. And not once again, from this point forward, did humanity ever spiral down to that point where God found them there in Genesis 6 and said, every single intention of their heart is upon evil continually. Humanity hasn't come to that place again. There's hope. There's a promise. Something new has been introduced. God is making promises, and they are promises which he is keeping. And from this point forward, we're going to find bad humans, but we don't find humanity in that same condition that God found it in before the flood. God approaches one man 10 generations after Noah, and he makes a promise, and it's a promise which leads directly to Jesus. This is where the story of rescue begins. The story of hope begins with Abram. Abram and the patriarchs to follow could not grasp the full magnitude of it. He was told that God would make a great nation of him. He was told that he would be blessed by Yahweh, that his name would be great, that he would be a blessing to others. And concerning those who bless Abram, God would bless them. Concerning those who curse Abram, God would curse them. That's his promise from God. And Abram lived a pretty good life. He probably had no idea the significance of that life for thousands of years following him. He had no idea the full significance of it. God did, and in the meantime, as he used him, he blessed his life. He was told that in him all the families of the earth shall be blessed. In chapter 15, God told Abram that he would be his shield and his reward would be great. He was promised that he would have a natural-born son. He was told that his offspring would be beyond counting. How many offspring am I going to be able to have? Well, if you can count the stars, then you can count them. In chapter 17, he was told that he would father a multitude of nations. And here God changed his name from Abraham, father of height. I don't understand that. I guess he was the father of tall people. And he changed it from father of height to Abraham, father of multitudes. And finally, God established with Abraham and his offspring an everlasting covenant. And the thing is, God didn't just make these promises once. God wasn't like, that old guy that got married, and on the day he got married, he said, I love you to his wife, and he never said it again, and they were really old, and they went to counseling because there were problems, and the counselor said, what's wrong? And she said, he never says he loves me. And he's like, I told her when we got married, nothing's changed. God's not like that. God repeats his promises over and over again, time and time again, reminding Abraham of these promises, reminding his offspring over and over again, the same promises. And this is all amazing stuff. These are the promises of God, and they will not fail. So with all of this in mind, Abraham must have been a pretty amazing guy, right? Well, he did some good things. He showed some great faith. But he didn't always have an easy time walking in the promises. He still was afraid when he would come into a certain land that the king of that land might kill him because he has a beautiful wife. Well, God promised he was going to give him an offspring. God promised he was going to make his descendants many. He had not had a descendant yet he was still fearful that some king of some land might kill him. And so he came into different places, and he allowed his wife to be taken by other men, saying that she was his sister. And strangely, both times he profited greatly with physical wealth. He was slow to respond one time when his wife was captured, but Lot was captured, and he responded immediately. My wife, she's been captured. I know, we should probably do something about that. Lot's been captured. The knucklehead, Lot, was captured, and he goes, let's go, immediately. Instead of trusting in God's promises for a son with Sarah, his wife, he had a son with her servant. Abraham showed great faith at times, but also he showed a great lack of faith time and time again. One of the greatest displays of faith was in chapter 22. You know the story where the Lord said, Abraham, I want you to go to this mountain. I want you to take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and take him, and I want you to offer him up there to me as a sacrifice. Now God had to reestablish two things and set them back in order. Isaac had become Abraham's first love. And God needed to restore his place in Abraham's heart. Also, God wanted to give us a picture, a message, an illustration of what he one day would have to do to redeem humanity. This was a message, a picture for those who would follow, that God one day would have to do this very thing to redeem humanity. This was not a story of human sacrifice. God never intended for Abraham to kill his own son, but God did intend to give us a picture of the gospel. And God did intend to restore order in Abraham's heart. And so when Abraham proved to be faithful to this call, and he was ready to go through with it, and the Lord provided instead a ram there, God reminded him once again of this promise. He was a man of great faith, but with that he was also a man of great failure. In Abraham, we see the promises are all about God, and the promises are not about Abraham. Isaac's life moves by pretty quietly in comparison to his father's and his son Jacob's. We get the story of Abraham's servant who went and found for him a wife, and we find out about the birth of his twin sons, Esau and Jacob, and we're given the account where God repeats the promises which were given to Abraham in Genesis 26, verses 2 through 4. It says, "And the Lord appeared to him and said, 'Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your offspring,'" here he is speaking to Isaac, "to you and your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offerings as the stars of heaven. I will give to your offspring all the land, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed." The promise is repeated. It was given to Abraham many times. Now the promise is passed on to Isaac. Shortly after this, Isaac took a lesson from his father. After this great promise from the Lord, he takes a lesson from his father, and he lied about his wife Rebekah to the king of the Philistines, and he said, "Oh, she's my sister." And later the king looks out his window and he sees him treating her not like a sister. And he comes and he confronts him. "Why have you done this? Someone could have taken your wife and brought the curse of God upon us. Why have you done this?" And he put out a decree that no one would touch his wife. And he got angry, but he didn't hurt him. In fact, Isaac went out and planted his crops there in that land, and man, the Lord blessed it, and he became rich. And he provoked the people in that land to jealousy. And finally the king looked upon Isaac and just said, "You have become too powerful. You have become a threat. You need to go away." And so he packed up and he left, and he went to different places, and he started to dig wells, and he started to have disputes with people, and he would go and he'd dig another well, and there'd be disputes. And finally he dug a well, and he said, "This is our well, and this is where we're going to be." And then the Lord spoke to him again and repeated the promise in chapter 26, verse 24. The same promise was given again. His twin sons, Esau and Jacob, they were not identical twins. I believe they looked quite different. One was the manly man. He was quite hairy. And Jacob was different than that. Jacob was really ambitious. He didn't settle for his lot in life. His name means heel grabber or catcher. It literally means tripper up, or one who seeks to trip other people up. Or as Gil Irwin, if you've read any of his books, he likes to interpret his name as being dirty, sneaky thief. I think that's a little bit of artistic license in that. But he was kind of a trickster. He was a schemer. He was not an honest man. The birthright was to be passed down to Esau. He was the firstborn. That was supposed to be the blessing, the birthright, the inheritance was supposed to be his. But that's not what happened. Jacob was not content being second, and his mom didn't want him to be second either. It's like he was a mama's boy. And she's like, "We're going to figure this out." So he schemed along with his mother to win his brother's birthright from his old, feeble, and blind father. And the strange thing is, even though he schemed and lied and deceived to get which was not rightfully his, even though he did all of this, God continued his plan. God's promise remained. Not through the lineage of the rightful heir, not through Esau. God's plan continued through Jacob, through the scheming, cheating son. That's who God continued to give his promises to. So very soon after the lying and the cheating and the deceit, something very contradictory happened. Jacob was given the promise. I mean, he was probably still feeling quite dirty, quite guilty about what he had done. And the Lord appeared to him, the very promise that Yahweh had given his father and to his grandfather. In chapter 28, verses 13 through 15, behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south, and in you your offspring, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you. I will keep you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. He had just cheated his brother out of his birthright. He had just dishonored and deceived his dad. And the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, you, Jacob, are my man. Is that weird? God is not rewarding people based on them being good. God is rewarding people because he chooses to love them and use them. Because people like Jacob are not promise keepers. God is a promise keeper, but not people like Jacob. He's a man who will break his promises. He's a dirty, sneaky thief. And that's what he did to his brother. Soon after this, Jacob met and fell in love with his cousin Rachel. At the same time, he also met someone who was probably a greater schemer than he was, Laban. His uncle Laban pulled a fast one on Jacob. After working 7 years for the hand of Rachel, his wife, the second daughter of Laban, the day was set, the party was rocking, the wine was flowing. Jacob stumbles to his tent, and Laban says, I'll bring you your wife. All right. And he stumbles to his tent, and he brings the wife. Jacob wakes up the next morning, had a headache, like a bad one. Opens his eyes, and he's like, what? He's looking at the girl next to him. He's like, whoa, it's the ugly sister. He was mad. But eventually he worked another 7 years, and finally he married Rachel. And by the way, polygamy is not something that God is favorable towards. And Jacob finally left Laban in a sneaky and cowardly fashion. He just kind of snuck away. And Laban's like, where'd you go? And chased him down and was very angry. There was conflict, and eventually terms were made with Laban, and Jacob continued. But something cool happened to Jacob. In chapter 32, verse 1, it says that Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. It's just kind of an obscure little passage there. You know, he said, I'm going forward. I've made my peace with Laban. I'm moving forward into my own life with my wives and my sheep and all my people, and I'm moving forward. And then in verse 1 of 32, the angels of God met him. What happened there? Who were these guys? What was going on? What did they say? Let's take a quick toll of Jacob's life. God spoke to him and promised a blessing to him. The entire time he was with Laban, he prospered. No matter what scheme Laban came up with to ensure that he would not prosper, Jacob did prosper. God blessed the remaining option that Jacob was given every time. And then, as he's traveling, angels greet him. Jacob should be pretty confident in the Lord by now. Pretty confident that God has his back. But immediately after this encounter, he had doubts. You know, he fears his brother, and he expects the worst, because he's heard about Esau. Esau became a mighty guy with many warriors around him. You know, it's like, well, I need to go and meet my brother. And he sent message forward, and his messenger came back, and he said, you're not going to go meet your brother. Why? Because he's coming here, and he has a whole army with him. And he began to shake in his boots. But once again, God does something strange. He meets Jacob the night before this fearful encounter and wrestles with him. That's strange, isn't it? But it's what God determined needed to be done with Jacob. He wrestled with him, and Jacob never gave up. Even after the Lord crippled him, knocking his hip out of joint, Jacob just continued to wrestle, continued to cling to him, did not give up, and God commended him for that. Blessed him, gave him a new name, called him Israel. He went from being deceiver, tripper-upper, and God renamed him Israel. Literally, may God prevail. He was fearful to meet his brother, but hey, he just wrestled with God and did not die. And so he went ready to face anything, and in the morning he limped out onto the road, and he met his brother, and all was well. Jacob went on to have 12 sons. He unwisely showed exceeding favor to his son Joseph, his youngest son, who, with great help from his father, ended up being quite a narcissist. He was just all about himself. He would go out boldly to his brothers and, I know I'm the youngest, but, Dad loves me best. Check out my coat. You don't have a coat like this. I have a pretty cool coat. Let me tell you about my dream. You all are bowing down to me. He was all about himself. And it's a wonder that the brothers were like, let's kill him. That's right, let's kill him. Judah stepped in and devised a plan to save his life. And, it's like, well, let's just sell him into slavery. So that's what they did. And God opened the doors for Jacob to win favor as a slave, and he did well, but then something bad happened, and he had to go to prison, and as he was there, he had the opportunity to win the favor of Pharaoh, and he went from prisoner in the dungeon to number 2 in the whole land, and he devised a plan to equip Egypt to survive the upcoming plague and enabled Egypt to be a blessing to the nations around them who were suffering from famine. And one day he looks out, and here comes his brothers. 11 creepy men show up for food, and he knows who they are. He didn't kill them. That's strange. He just didn't go down and say, you know who I am? I'm number 2 in Egypt, and you sold me into slavery. He didn't do that. He didn't reveal to them their crime. Instead, he told them, hey, bring your younger brother back. And eventually, there was all just kind of weird stuff going on between him and his brothers, and they're probably thinking, why is this guy taking so much interest in us? Why did this guy, frame one of us for stealing? What's going on here? And eventually, he brings them all together, and I think Joseph was wrestling with what to do about them. But eventually, the Lord laid upon his heart just the spirit of mercy and understanding and grace, and that's what he extended to them. He revealed to them that he was their brother, Joseph, the young kid that they had sold into slavery, sitting before them, the second most powerful man in the land. And his response summarizes the theme of these 38 chapters. We've already read it once, but let's read it again in chapter 50, verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. People break their promises. People are not as perfect as we want them to be. The heroes that we emulate are not always heroes. Sometimes they fail. Sometimes they don't have faith. Sometimes they do dumb things. And yet God's promise through them continues on. People are evil, but God is good. People break promises, but God does not. God chose men who were liars, doubters, schemers, deceivers. He chose those guys, and men who showed both seasons of faith and seasons of doubt, men that were supposed to be looked to as heroes. And we're reminded that, yes, they did noble things, but they weren't perfect. They were broken. They were messed up, just like us. God made a promise, and God kept his promise in spite of them. This lesson will continue on as a common theme throughout the rest of the Old Testament. People will fail, but God won't fail the people. Jesus still appeared. He still lived. He still fulfilled the prophecies. He still walked in perfection. He still died as the ultimate sacrifice. He still satisfied his Father, and the debt which separated humanity from the Creator. He still did all that. It was paid in full, not because humans are good, but because God is good. The work was done. And so that's the book of Genesis. Creation displays the wonder and the power of God. The fall displays that break in fellowship. 4 through 11 gives a picture of what humanity is like, independent, without hope, spiraling into devastation time and time again. Chapters 12 through 50 show us that God is a God who keeps his promises in spite of men like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in spite of the junk that is bouncing around in our hearts, in our thoughts, in our deeds, in our lives. As redeemed children, his promises are kept for us. We are still rescued. We are still forgiven. God keeps his promises. It's easy for us to have doubts. It's easy for us to have fears. It's easy for us to lay condemnation and guilt upon ourselves when we're not doing what we're supposed to do. And we think, oh, I have not earned God's favor. Oh, I have not earned God's blessing in my life right now. And God's like, I favor you because I favor Jesus. I bless your life because Jesus is a blessing. And that's where our favor is found. If we are to be those who do good things and go forward in obedience to the Lord and walk in faith, we do that because we recognize the grace which he has shown to us. But his promises are still his promises, no matter what we do. If we plant our hopes in people, if we seek out heroes in the flesh, not regarding the dark side that they obviously have, if we seek our rewards in people, if we place unreal expectations upon ourselves, we will be let down, and we'll be let down hard. And so the challenge I find here is don't hope in people, love people, and extend the grace to them that God extends to us. Don't hope in the things that you wish or you want that may or may come to pass. Don't even hope in yourself. Hope only in the glory of God. He will be glorified no matter what. And that's where our hope should be planted, and that is the kind of hope that does not disappoint us.